Awesome. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the council meeting for the 28th of September for the Ōtorohanga District Council. It's good to see we've got everybody in attendance this morning and there's no apologies. Somewhat strange seeing staff sitting in their own respective homes as opposed to being with us here in this room. So Brendan, hey, thanks for getting this technology up and going, because goodness knows what it would have been like otherwise. Certainly with what we had in the past, it would have been somewhat of a problem. Moving on to, it's not so much words of wisdom, but I just have a few things to say this morning. And it starts with, rest in peace, my faithful friend. You came into our lives one day, so happy and so smart, our constant companion, loyal and loving from the start. You brought such love and laughter into our happy home. With you sitting by my side, I never felt alone. Now you've left us, it's almost more than I can bear. The house seems so empty without you standing there. You no longer greet me as I walk through the door. You're no longer there to make me smile, to make me laugh anymore. Just for now, I need time to mourn, my broken heart to mend. Some might say it's just a dog, but I know I've lost my faithful friend. We put our little Maggie, who's been with our family for 17 years, put her down on Saturday. So huge loss for us and my parents, whose house was frequented by Maggie for the last 17 years on a daily basis. So yeah, two families are in mourning at the moment. So yeah, wasn't a particularly good Saturday. Right, is there anything in today's council meeting that councillors have to declare or wish to declare a conflict of interest? Right, if not, we'll move on. Nobody is called for the public forum. So go on to confirmation of minutes of the Ōtorohanga District Council dated 17th of August. Do we have a move in this sequence? Sorry.
Through your worship, just before we head into the minutes, we've just discovered this morning that there's an omission with the confidential minutes. So we don't have a confidential agenda today to receive the Ōtorohanga Community Board minutes or the adopt the District Council minutes. So what we'll do is our October meeting is in 3 weeks' time. We'll put the confidential minutes into that meeting. So my apologies for that oversight.
So we're still doing the public minutes?
So we'll still adopt the public ones, but we'll adopt the confidential ones next time.
Okay, cool. So I'll just reword that. The confirmation of the public minutes of the Ōtorohanga District Council dated 17th of August. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Move Councillor Kloss, second Councillor Ferguson. Are there any points of interest or change or? No? Well, good, thank you. Moving on to the confirmation of minutes of the Ōtorohanga District Council Risk and Assurance dated 1st September 2021. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Move Councillor Jeffries, seconded. Yep, Councillor Williams. Any points from those? Thank you. Moving on to the receipt of minutes of the Ōtorohanga Community Board dated 5th of August 2021. Do I move and a seconder that they be received? Councillor Christensen. Councillor Dow, no changes or anything there, no corrections. Good, thank you. Moving on to the receipt of minutes of the Ōtorohanga Community Board extraordinary meeting. That'll be the confidential one of that, is it?
No, it's the public extraordinary meeting.
Okay, cool. Dated 16th of August. We have a mover and a seconder for those. Again, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Christensen. Anything from those minutes, councillors? No, thank you. Moving on to receipt of minutes of the Ōtorohanga Community Board dated 2nd of September 2021. A mover and a seconder for the receipt of those. Councillor Dow, Councillor Christensen. Any matters arising from those? No, thank you. Also, now we'll move on to item 1 and 8, my verbal report of what I've been up to the last month. And it was kind of funny because I didn't think I'd been doing much because there's so much cancelled that first week once we went into lockdown. So following on our last council meeting, we went into lockdown on August the 17th. I attended the following Monday, the Maniapoto Hui, which was on every Monday evening at 6 o'clock, just to see what the support packages are going on and what community help there was out there for those families that were in need. 26th of last month, I had a Mayor's Task Force catch up with my coordinator on the 30th. We caught up as elected members to see what was going on. September the 1st, we had our Risk and Assurance meeting. I had a Mayor's Task Force core group meeting on the 2nd of September. And my biggest learnings from that is when you go into lockdown, change your agenda straight away, because don't try and do a 5-hour meeting where you've only got half an hour break for lunch and you're just talking to people. You've got presenters such as government ministers coming in, and just it's too hard to stay alert for that long and yeah, to get through the whole thing. I think Councillor Cross knows exactly what I'm talking about. We had a Mayor's Task Force Community Recovery meeting on the 3rd, another Mangapoto Zoom on the 6th, a Three Waters meeting on the 7th, meeting with the local government CE on the 8th about Mayor's Task Force again, about what our next steps are. We had a regional passenger rail meeting on the 9th, and that there's about, started with, it's NZTA is a part of it, but certainly the councils from Wellington right the way up the main trunk line to Hamilton, doing the feasibility work around a passenger rail service on that route. So it's just not the Northern Explorer doing it, but whether there's any opportunity. It's an interesting meeting because there's a fair bit of work's gone into it, but when it's not signalled in the NZTA long-term plan, you kind of wonder what the point is even going through this process. But I suppose unless we do the initial feasibility work on it, you've got to have a starting point somewhere. So yeah, I mean, some districts are really passionate about it. Unfortunately, when they first proposed it, one of the stops was not Ōtorohanga. So yeah, kind of lose interest straight away. Anyway, still support I suppose, the motivation behind it, and we'll still be a part of that collective. And I then spoke on the 10th in Brisbane at an Asia Pacific forum, and that was also with Mayor's Task Force again. Obviously, again, during Zoom, interesting, you see yourself on a big screen with a few attendees, but most people through the Asia Pacific would obviously attending virtually. I had a meeting with the Labour MP, Angela Robbs, on the 15th, and that was prior to her going to the Kiwi House for a visit, prior to her talking to in Parliament about the wonderful work that the Community Recovery Program was doing and what the Kiwi House was doing in Ōtorohanga. I caught up with John Robson on the 16th. We had a councillor catch up on the 20th, workshop on the 21st, Three Waters Hui and Taupo, which Tanya and I attended virtually on the 22nd. Then on the 23rd, Tanya and I talked at the Waitomo Ratepayers meeting, as we made you guys aware of the other day. Very interesting. It was an incredibly intimate evening, but we were there for 2 hours. So yeah, it was interesting. And then I was chairing an employment Waikato plan meeting yesterday morning. So I'd like to move that my report be received. Second, Councillor Christensen, any questions from what have we been up to? Very small group. There's only like 5 of them, I believe it was. Yeah, it was cool. I think the big thing that they got out of it as ratepayers was their need, or I suppose their perspective, that the relationship between a mayor and chief executive is absolutely paramount in moving the district forward and having that conversation. If there's a real barrier there, it creates issues on so many fronts. And I mean, appreciating, certainly not saying anything bad about Waitomo district, but I suppose the priest has covered it enough that there's a few issues there in terms of relationships. So, and that relationship is the start of the relationship we have with elected members as well. And we've seen it even the Three Waters meetings. And there's a Waikato Council that has to have lawyers present in a meeting to ensure that they can get agenda items across the table. So I think that the relationships between us all is really, really important. And I suppose that honesty in the relationship is a big part of it. So that's what they got out of it as much as anything. And, you know, obviously they're going through this CE appointment process down there at the moment. And as Tanya pointed out to them, the relationship the CE has with the community as well is absolutely fundamental. So there's an open door policy there that the community can voice their concerns. So yeah, it was an interesting evening. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 189, Three Waters Reform Position Statement. Mark, over to you.
Good morning, Your Worship, councillors. Thank you. I'll take the report as read, but I thought I would just give a bit of a brief summary on the content of it, and then I'll hand over to some questions. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. You'll see in the executive summary that back in the beginning of August this year, there was a pause put on the reform process for councils to take some time to consider the reform proposal, and councils were given 8 weeks to basically consider what the proposal meant to councils and to engage with some key stakeholders on how they perceive the Three Water reform to date. I've put in the report a reasonable background as to how we've arrived at this situation, and I won't read through the whole thing, but I think it was important to capture some of the background to just sort of provide a historical record of how we've arrived to this point. And I won't go into the background too much, but I think I'll sort of explain the process we followed, and you'll see in the report that the beginning of the 8-week period, shortly thereafter, we were straight into lockdown. So I think it's fair to say that we probably didn't get the opportunity to conduct our engagement probably the way we envisaged it, and it took place more virtually over Zoom and phone calls rather than face-to-face meetings. In saying that, I think we've captured some really good information, and you'll see in the position statement that we've prepared that there seems to be some common themes coming through. I won't dive into the detail of the statement. I'm sure you've all read it, and I'm sure I can answer any questions in regards to that. But I've also put in there 3 options, obviously, what to do today. And the first option is obviously we can do nothing. The second option is sorry, I've got those around the wrong way. So the first option is to adopt the position statement. The second option being not to adopt it, and the third option being to adopt an amended statement from the one that's currently before you. When we looked at the sort of process that we followed, we engaged with local iwi, elected members, and the rural water scheme committees. Those workshops I thought were very engaging, and I thought we had a real good sense of what people were thinking, and we've tried to capture that within the position statement. And although the statement sort of reads in bullet points, I think it was important, and we discussed that, to capture it in its rawest form as possible, and to put it in a way that could be easily compartmentalised when someone should pick it up and read it, rather than try and decipher a long narrative. So I think we've achieved that, and open to any comments on that. I think the next steps, as I've detailed in there, is this will then be presented to the Minister of Local Government, and they're looking at making some further decisions on the reform at the end of October. I think that's a fair summary of where we're at, and I'm willing to take any questions. I suppose the recommendation at this stage, if my computer will come back into life.
Awesome, thank you, Mark. But I think there's a couple of things here. First off, I suppose on reflection, when we were attending that Taupo hui, was the fact that we did engage, or have engaged to a limited degree because of COVID, with iwi and our rural water schemes, which is considerably more than what a lot of other councils have done. So it probably does give us a bit more of a position when we're presenting this position statement to the Minister as well. I appreciate your points that it's only bullet points, taking into account there's at least 66 other submissions from councils around New Zealand. So there will be a huge amount of duplication across New Zealand, but there'll also be a whole lot of conflicting views as well. And as we've said with that Taupo hui, that we couldn't even write a letter which represented the positions of the councils across the Waikato, Taranaki and Bay of Plenty, because there's such conflicting views in terms of what the Three Waters reform looked like. And all we could do at that point is relay the survey results back to the Minister and get the Minister and DIA to understand that there's a huge array of concerns across all of New Zealand. So I'll open up to councillors. I have no objection to making amendments to the proposal at this point, should anybody around this table wish to make any changes. Probably my only question would be is uncertain of the significance of any changes would make. But I'll open up to the floor to ask questions of Mark or Tanya or myself.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, I sent a list of comments into the council a day or two back, and Tanya has already responded to some of those. But Mark, it's just not clear to me at the moment. Are we just talking about water, or are we talking about wastewater as well here? Because one of the statements that came through in the information I read suggested that that the process to date is only really dealing with water, and that we may have to go through this whole exercise again with wastewater. What's your take on that?
It's always been my understanding that we've concentrated on the two waters, water and wastewater. Stormwater seems to be the one that's there's a little bit of uncertainty about how that'll be tackled, but from my understanding is definitely water and wastewater at this stage, with stormwater sort of sitting out there in the too hard basket, because of obviously the connection with the roading network. That's my understanding, Kit. So
I agree, through you, Your Worship. I agree with that, and I guess that's reflected in our position statement under the "We support the case for change, that everyone in Aotearoa deserves to have access to safe drinking water and to have water bodies that are safe for recreational, environmental and cultural activities." So the second part of that is around water bodies being the receiving environment for wastewater discharges. So stormwater is the little orphan here, and it's the one that there's the most uncertainty over in terms of its future and the connection with roading.
I would say it's what's probably being highlighted or makes it appear that there's only one water that we're talking about is because there's been so much complexity around the delivery of potable drinking water that in stormwater, I won't say it's not stormwater, wastewater, as though it's not any simpler. It just hasn't been the key focus of discussion. But certainly in terms of those water bodies that Tanya is referring to, in terms of the prioritisation of works, I'd imagine the likes of Kawhia as an example with the wastewater system out there is of equal priority to any of the big cities in their discharge, because it is about those water bodies at the end of the day as opposed to population. Unfortunately, that hasn't been as expressed as clearly as that to us at the moment. That's the case.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Well, that clarifies that. Thank you. I was just a bit concerned that we were going to have to go through this whole exercise again with another. Yeah. Just looking at that Morrison Lowe survey that came through, and looking at the proposed governance arrangements, it was interesting that out of all of the respondents, only 6 thought that the government arrangements that have been talked about were going to be suitable. Now, I don't know what our position is in terms of how we see. Are we talking in terms of what are we supporting in terms of governance, or is that still up in the air?
I think, like, I started trying to answer your questions yesterday, Kit, and then I gave up.
Yeah.
Quite simply because, we're of the majority on those that are questioning the governance arrangement, along with a few other questions there as well. But as it goes back to their position statement of the 22 councils in Entity B, the reason why a letter couldn't be written to represent the position of Entity B is because there's so many disparate views. And I think when we see this going to the government from across the country, that there's where some of those, the governance factor is going to be a huge one, that they'll have to second guess in terms of what's the best way to represent 22 councils. And I think when Brian was here giving us in that workshop, there will be probably a couple of tiers to that governance structure as well. But in saying that, then we get it to a point where it becomes incredibly top heavy. As with if there's 22 councils sitting on the board, it's too top heavy. I don't think we're ever going to come up with a governance structure which is going to be appease everybody. That's probably the first point. What that looks like. I think that's what the government's going to consider over the next few weeks.
Yes, I'd agree. I think the suggestion that a committee, if you want to call it that, of 22 councils being represented on that committee, the and then you've had your iwi hapu groups to that as well. I just can't see how something like that would work. It would be hopeless. So I was just interested in what your thoughts were on that. Pardon me. And one of the other things that was interesting for me was that currently private and rural water supplies are excluded. Is that your understanding? That was the statement in the clause 7.1.2.
I wouldn't say they're excluded, but not the key focus of prioritisation at this stage. There's still work to do in the rural water schemes, and as we said, it's 2024, 25 before they're impacted.
Right.
Is that your understanding, Mark? I mean, I think it's determined by the number of households or connections that the private water schemes have. That's my understanding. So for me, with my 2 tanks that only service my house, then I'm assuming that will be not the focus of these water reforms. But if someone is servicing 10 houses through a water supply, then they may be party to the reforms. Is that your understanding, Mark?
Yeah, that's a good analogy there, Tanya. I think that the key here is private water supplies may not necessarily be part of the formation of the entities, but they're definitely going to be part of the regulation under Taumata Arawai. So I think there's 2 parts to the water reform, but the size of those supplies is still a little bit unknown as to what will govern a supply. I think when they originally started out, it was anyone supplying more than one property, but I think they're looking at that number now as to what would govern a private supply. But I think the key there is even a private supply that's supplying other people or other buildings will still be part of the regulation under safe drinking water, but may not form part of the actual council handing over infrastructure to the entities. So yeah, there's sort of 2 prongs to that, councillor. Does that sort of clear that up?
Yeah, oh, that's fine. I just wondered whether the definition of private supplies are included marae and Papakainga. Do you know? Or are they separate? It's not clear whether marae and Papakainga housing is actually part of the private water supply that they refer to.
Yeah,
I'd
no,
be fair
I'm
to
not,
say that's probably right.
sure.
It's not clear.
It's not clear.
It's I don't have an answer either. Yeah,
because some of those are also could almost be called rural water supply too, couldn't they?
Yeah, and it sometimes it doesn't. It's not going to come down to the number of dwellings or the number of properties you serve. For example, on a marae, you're talking about a considerable number of people, and how that sort of looks at this stage, I'm unclear, because if you're obviously holding a function that could be supplying water up to 300 to 400 people, then you would think that would be under their regulation, but only one supply as such. So yeah, I'm not sure what that looks like yet. Good question.
Just while we're on that, then in dealing with the rural water supplies, and it's a suggestion that's been made previously, in terms of representational governance, is it something that we could support that a subcommittee be formed of that represents the rural water supply, those are connected to water supplies, and that subcommittee has direct representation to the board or an entity? Is that something that we've considered? I'm just concerned that the reason why I've suggested that is I'm just concerned that some of these small supplies are going to get lost in the grand scheme of things, and they're entitled to as much as say as anybody. And I just wondered whether any consideration had been given to how they would be represented.
I would say at this point it's probably too soon because we don't know where it's heading at this stage, so until we get the representation. Sorry.
Through you, Worship. I'll just start another heading in our position statement that has our suggestions kind of section. So, we've raised a lot of concerns, etc. But maybe that's a suggestion that we could make if it has the support of the council. So I'll just kind of make notes, and then at the end of it, we can have a look and see what bits we want to leave in and what bits we want to take out. Is that all right?
Thank you. Following up, I've got Annette, then I've got Roy, then I've got Rob.
Okay, I've just got two quick ones and then I'll back off. Are we able to restate our position regarding our stranded overheads? Have we quantified that? To what extent does that affect us, if at all? And the second question was, they talk about entities giving effect to our LTP and AMPs and so on. But they talked initially about the first 3 years, which I understand because you review your plan every 3 years. But I could personally only support that if that support from the entities or giving effect to those LTPs was an ongoing one. And by that I mean that at the end of every review, that the entity would then give effect to the reviewed LTP, not just the first 3 years of the 2021-2031. Is that your understanding of it? I'm just concerned that they might give effect to our LTP for the first 3 years, and then after that, we've got no say.
I'll let Tanya answer that
Yeah,
one.
through you, Worship. So we do have under the heading, we are concerned about the fifth to bottom bullet point on the second page says entities must give effect to LTP asset management plans and infrastructure strategy. So how about I say ongoing in an ongoing way? Is that all right?
Yes, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor.
And stranded overhead, sorry, can I just respond to that? And Graham and Brendan may need to chip in if they can. So I circulated some information to councillors about a week ago that Brendan had done. That is as far as we have got on it. So in my talks with other councils around the region and across Entity B, it appears to me that our level of stranded overheads would not be the same as medium or large size councils, because I will still need 2 accountants. I will still need 2 IT staff. I will still need 3 customer services people. I don't have a team of 10 in my finance team where if 3 waters disappears, I cut 2 accountants. I don't have that kind of, we've got 55 warm bodies and we're going to need all of them going forward. So in that respect, there's not quite the same sort of calculation in terms of staff. And the information that Brendan provided around debt levels and all that sort of thing, that's as far as we've got to with doing the calculations. But Graham or Brendan, if you're there and you have anything else to add to that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think you've pretty much covered it, Tanya. Yeah, because of our small size, we don't have the seeing the same amount of overheads that a large council would have, and for us to undertake even a lower level of service, we would still require a similar staffing level, but as you say, we haven't gone down to that in a large degree of detail.
Cool. Thanks, Graham. Councillor Williams.
Your Worship, my comment was just around the questions on the private water supplies. The water services bill, acceptable solutions, it's under 500, and it's the proposed acceptable solution, not one that's been put out for consultation and accepted. It's just a proposal. Provides quite a bit of guidance for just the average household sitting out in the rural area that's got a roof collection, and provides the list of acceptable standards that you need to meet which is for the greater part of what our district is anyway. I think the key thing that we're supporting the fact that there needs to be reform, and there's a lot of water that's being delivered that has not been under anyone's watchful eye, and taumata Hawaii is going to be the best outcome from the whole reform, is that we've got a body that's in the long run, because they obviously can't do it all at once. And I note some of the concerns that came in latterly about how that monitoring was going to be, and that council had failed to do it up until now, but actually it was never our job. And I think that the reforms are going to provide a lot more, already have a lot more clarity around how that should work. And the private schemes, like it's in that acceptable solution, it says under 500 people, but and then it goes to talk to an individual household collecting water, but it doesn't actually say whether that comes under the definition of private scheme. But even so, there's still the time frame on it anyway. We'll have time, a number of years to be able to meet those standards, and then another couple of years after that for when everyone will need to be taking responsibility.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to Mark for a very good position statement. You've done a lot of work. Can see that, and yeah, thank you for that. I'd just like to reiterate some of the points that Councillor Jeffries has made, particularly with the governance and representation. The majority of my ward, this would not affect because they are private, have their own private supplies for their farms and for their homes. But I have a very vocal and enthusiastic Waipa Water Supply Committee, and they have been talking to me, and they're very strong on having some link of governance from grassroots to the top, because they see so much value in what the water supply gives to their land, and it's preserving that value which they are very very strong about. So just would like to reiterate that it's really strong, that somewhere there is a link that the end supply has some input into the somehow through the governance structure to the water supply governance. In fact, I'd like to just challenge is Te Mata Arawai also a method of monitoring the effective representation. You know, not just the financial part, but actually making sure that little water supplies don't get lost. You know, that's just a question.
I'm sure you, Worship, know that won't be their role. Their role is solely focused on the environmental regulations. And so that's why I guess there's quite a complex governance entity that's proposed, so that those other things, consumer, individual kind of concerns, complaints, that sort of thing, can be dealt with.
And through Worship, that's when you say that most people won't be affected, that is where they will be affected, that we will now have a body that's going to effect the regulations. And so even if you're collecting water off your roof, there is a standard to be met.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things too that, when you read all the information that we've given, there's so much of the information is actually questions. It's what will happen, what will we do. There's very little, what will happen in terms of governance or in terms of how it will work. And I just think that going forward, we need to have a little bit more direction from the Three Waters steering group of what actually will happen, particularly in terms of governance. Lastly, I'd just like to propose an amendment to Mark's position statement, and that's the very last sentence needs to be much stronger. Rather than we look forward to seeing that what direction the reform takes next, I'd like it to say that we look forward to the steering group take on our proposals and give effect to them. So I'd just like to make that concluding statement and the conclusion much stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Through you, Your Worship, I'll add that in, and maybe we would like to also be part of the ongoing dialogue around how it evolves. Yeah, so I'll include that
Thank you.
too.
Councillor Klaus.
Thank you. I'm really concerned that we are taking a proactive support of this new activity by the government, and that you're giving an assumption that we think it's all okay by going along with it. And that is not what I'm hearing from ratepayers in my area at all. In fact, they wish that we were like Auckland and Canterbury, who are opting out, telling them to go and jump. And this is what I don't understand. Are you wanting to have a Bob each way? Or are you going along with and see value in this whole scheme that's been put forward by the Ngāi Mahuta? Because this very strong view that the idea that, for a start, that the water schemes, and I'm not even talking about the rural ones at this stage, that from the towns and the area will be taken. And in several cases, people call it theft, and there's no other way to describe it. So to be going along with something like this, we're assuming that this whole scheme has value. I acknowledge that we need a regulator, and you don't need such a huge operation to put in a regulator. Yes, they made the DHBs responsible. It was an afterthought. DHBs never wanted it. They never had a role for managing water before. And it was in the period when I was on the DHB board. It wasn't even part of their attention. And so I don't give any credence to what they've done before, but yes, have regulators, and it's quite a cumbersome thing to actually put in place and have regular inspections and that sort of thing. The second thing is the rural schemes, from what I've observed, is that they don't need people coming over them. They want to have good schemes for themselves. They're well able to operate them and bring in the skills, whether it's council or from private enterprise or whoever, who could actually do it. So they take their responsibilities very seriously about water, because it's their livelihoods for them and people who live in the districts and their school activity and everything. That means everything to them. So they're not going to want to see it disappear. And they don't need a great big governance telling them what to do. So I'm really not assured. I don't really understand the stance that this council council is taking as to how far it's going to go. Is it basically putting itself in there for supporting it, or are they keeping a distance? And the other thing is, I see the comments that are coming from iwi and their representatives, and it appears that they are looking for or assuming there is something in it for them. And the last email that, or comments that came through by email that I think you passed it on, Tanya, was from a person who was talking about the future. It mightn't be now, but they are looking that there's benefit for iwi. This was my more strategic advisor, Many Oto Maori Transport. If you read there, you get a feeling that there is something there. And I think that's what they do want. But 50% of the water.
No, this 50% won't go to iwi at all. They're talking about 50% representation on the governance of iwi, but the water's not going to go to iwi. There's no ownership here mentioned.
I know that, but I don't think they think that. And this is
the questions that were asked by iwi are their job opportunities in terms of the testing of the quality of the water, and around that space it wasn't about ownership at all. To answer a couple of the other questions, as you would have heard when Brian was speaking to us a couple of weeks ago, that there's been obviously a bit of a U-turn or a shift in the government's take on the rural water schemes, and if they want to be their own entities, it appears that there's going to be the case. So the concerns that you've raised just now about by the rural water schemes, those fears should be allayed somewhat. But in saying that, Te Mata Arawai is still going to be checking that their water quality is of the level it should be. So I think for the rural water schemes, they can rest in peace a wee bit at this stage from what the original proposals were, because the original proposals were, yes, the ownership was going to be taken off them. In terms of our position of opt-in and opt-out, we've made it fairly clear that we haven't made a decision on opt-in and opt-out until we get further answers from the government, because at this stage there's too many unanswered questions to choose one way or the other. The reason why I'm in support of reforms is because this is something the local government has ignored for at least 22 years in terms of the investment in infrastructure, and it's not local government's fault. That's the key point I'd like to make, that it's the inability for us through rates alone to fund the necessary upgrades to ensure that our infrastructure is at the level it could be. And we can again use Kāwhia as a prime example. If it is demonstrated through our water testing in Kāwhia Harbour that septic tanks are unsuitable, and this could be the same for Thames Coromandel, that there needs to be a far better reticulated wastewater system. Councils themselves can't afford to invest in that. So it only can be through reform that we can actually get those water standards to the level we need. The model put forth at the moment, there's way too many unanswered questions to say in or out. But if we're opting out purely on an emotive basis without actually listening to the facts behind it and the level of underinvestment across the country, that itself would be rather naive. I'd rather listen to the facts and get those behind me and leave emotion to one side to ensure that we do have potable drinking water, sustainable potable drinking water, and we're looking after the environment across the country. So they bring the answers to our questions on, and then we can make a more educated decision further down the track. I think at this stage it's too soon. Frustration, absolutely, because we should be frustrated that they've gone about something as huge as the 3 water reforms, and I don't think the DIA and the government have invested the personnel and the needs behind it to ensure that those questions and concerns have been answered in a timely manner. That's the biggest issue we have here at this stage. The timeframes put forward to us with so many unanswered questions. My take at this point, the timeframes will be extended, I would imagine, and it'll probably far greater aligned with local government review and reforms, and probably RMA reforms as well. That's just my take at this stage, and I could be totally wrong. Tanya.
Just through you, Your Worship, what do you think we would do if the government said we're extending the timeframe? what would we do? What would we do in that space of time?
We probably wouldn't do much different other than waiting for those questions to be answered, and we would carry on investing in our infrastructure.
So we would want answers to our questions.
Yeah.
We may not do anything except for consider the responses to our questions. That's
Correct.
What we'd like.
It would carry on investing as we are.
Just to be clear, when we say we want them to kind of stretch it out, what we're actually wanting.
Answers to our questions. Mark, is there anything to that you want to add? You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think that's been covered off really well. Thank you, Your Worship. Yep, no, nothing further to add.
Well,
Yes, mate.
Can I just ask for assurance to the ratepayers at the stance of this council that you're not jumping into
Oh, we've made that fairly clear. Yeah.
I don't think it is clear to the ratepayers.
Oh, if you read our response, it is clear. Our position statement. If you read in the press today, it was clear that Ōtorohanga has not made a decision whether to opt in and opt out, but we're certainly prepared to ask the questions rather than just putting a brick wall up and saying we're not interested. Again,
That's in the Waitomo News.
pardon me,
There's a report in the Waitomo News.
I'm not sure where that one was. Okay, yeah, Rodney. Oh, sorry, Councillor Down.
Sorry, yeah. I've got a couple of things. On the conclusion, I don't know, it seems to me like democracy's been left behind here. The government seems to be just doing what they want to do. So but the last sentence said something, could we please follow some democracy in this country? The other thing I get asked all the time, Mark would probably have to answer. I get a lot of people, excuse me, myself, probably one thinking, been drinking Ōtoronga's water for my whole life and it didn't kill me. What's actually wrong with our water anyway? So what's the new regulator? What sort of standards are going to, like I realise as human beings, we always progress and we try and do things better as we go along. There's a lot of things that have been done in the past which were wrong. You know, we only learn from science. There'll be things that we do wrong, but you know, in 100 years time, 50 years time, people will realise that but we're not necessarily deliberately going out and doing things wrong. You know, like everyone used to use the river as your rubbish dump to take things in. You know, people don't do that now. People are spending millions of dollars, to clean up things. But the drinking water things, we keep getting told that we need to meet this high new regulatory thing. Is it going to come out tasting like Heineken, or is it going to?
So I'll quickly let Tanya answer that, because what you'll find is
It's not new. The regulatory regime is not new. The same standards are in place.
Yes,
What's
we're meeting
changed?
anyway.
Yeah, what's changed is there is now an organisation with sole responsibility, so not embedded in a district health board or a Ministry of Health. Its sole focus and only job is to ensure safe and compliant drinking water, and I think wastewater as well. But yeah, so that is it. So the same standards that we've always had to meet. We've been testing. Mark will be able to tell you about our testing regime that we have to undertake. We've just got our latest compliance report, I think, through for the year. So same thing, but there is now an agency whose responsibility is to do it.
That's what I mean. We don't have to go and build a whole new treatment station to meet a higher standard. All those standards will naturally lift as we progress. But at the moment, there's nothing wrong with water.
No, there are things wrong with our water. Yes, we've had a boil water notice on one of our rural water schemes for how long, Mark? It's just been lifted, I think.
So the Ōtorohanga water scheme has had a boil water notice since February, but it's only just been lifted on the school. We've put some measures in place to keep the school off the boil water notice, but the remainder of the scheme is still under that notice. So I think if I can maybe through your worship, it's just answer Councillor Dow's few questions. I think that the level of compliance is probably not necessarily lifted, but I think the level of enforcement is going to lift considerably, which Tanya has mentioned. So, and I think there's no staff member out there that would not be trying to produce clean, safe drinking water. So it's just making sure that that the investment goes into those areas to make sure that we do remain within the drinking water standards that currently exist, and what that enforcement looks like in the future. I would say it's going to be a little bit more robust, and making sure that we do keep within that compliance. If that's sort of, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of in my take on it, I think everyone's take is basically we need the money to finance the infrastructure like we do with a lot of other things, you know. So, and yeah, the ratepayers is just not, we need more than the ratepayers to help fund some of the infrastructure.
And through you, Your Worship, some councils are putting that very idea through their submissions and saying, we don't support the reform package. We support a partnership with central government to ensure that we as a council can deliver safe and affordable drinking water, wastewater, etc. So that is another approach. And you might say, scrap this whole statement of position, and we just want to say that.
Yeah. I would definitely support what you're saying, but I'm kind of, well, it's more the process. Like I understand we legally can't opt in or out anyway. From what I've read, I've been a lot more reading, lately about and different things. I know people are standing up there, opting in, opting out, but legally it's not our job at the moment. So it is our job to send back feedback with what we're doing, what we're not happy with. I guess if the government comes and say, yeah, we've got an answer to every question of yours, we can, well, there's probably going to be nothing wrong with it, but I can't see being able to. But it just scares me when you see on the the media that they're already advertising for Three Waters staff. It's like it's a done deal. So I'm really worried about the democracy thing of it. It's just going to go. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it all goes back to it's all been very insulting the whole way through, with the sludge dripping out of taps and that, and saying reforms are necessary. So just, you at the moment, Councillor Ferguson. So Robin, you're absolutely right. It goes back in council hands, and money's given to us. So you support reform, in other words.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
know the council needs more money to do what it wants to do.
That would be ideal.
This bureaucracy, this whole nationally driven system, this is so wrong.
Yep. I don't think anybody's arguing with that. I think the point is here, what shape their reform is probably the biggest question, and that's what we don't have the answer to at this point. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. I wanted to just say that Councillor's Cross view, I do not wholeheartedly support, the Three Waters thing. You know how strong I've been against it from the start. But as we've got onto this, I've realised that we do need to do something. We've got the history. We know where we are. I do think we need better water. I think we need to look after, wastewater a lot better, everything else. And I've always had that view, and I've thought Ōtorohanga can do this and we can finance it, we can do it ourselves. But even talking to the staff and reading more about what's happening around the world, I've understood that I've got to look at the bigger picture, and we've got to keep in the ring or at the table talking about this stuff rather than saying, no, we're opting out, because we need to do something. And where we get to, like, there's a myriad of things that could get at the moment, but I think we need to get somewhere.
Thank you. Come on, Councillor Chris.
I'm just really thankful that it's not an opt-in, opt-out at present, and that we've got time, and all other councils have got time to do this position statement, and that hopefully the government will listen. They need to get their dots in a row before they try and say this is what's happening. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's the point. With this position statement from all the councils going forth now, this here's the opportunity for the government to listen to what the councils are thinking. And my guess would be if they don't listen at all, then you're going to see absolute anarchy across the country from councils. We will throw our toys out of the cot. And, if the reform for us, pretty much what Councillor Dow said, if the money could go back to councils to invest in their own way, whichever way it is, it's still called reform. So it's just a matter of how that reform looks is for the benefit of all councils across New Zealand and all citizens across New Zealand. So, Tanya, where are we at? Councillor Jeffries first.
Sorry, Worship, just one quick one. I wondered if the council would be prepared to add to, under our position, we are concerned about. I totally agree that debt or surpluses and operational reserves and so on should be considered as part of the transfer of assets. But there's nothing in there about the way in which those assets will be valued. And I wondered whether it was possible to perhaps add something in there that assets that are transferred to the new entity would be valued independently or something along those lines, as opposed to some arbitrary figure being given to us. Otherwise, we could be considerably out of pocket if they decide to only give us 50% of the value of the assets. So if something along those lines could be worded in there, that would be really good. And I'm a little bit like Councillor Ferguson. I've yet to be convinced one way or the other which way we should go. So I don't have a position at this stage, but certainly keeping an open mind.
Thank you. So Tanya,
I'm going to attempt to do something fancy. I've asked Brendan if I'll be able to cast my tablet onto the screen, and oops, he's replying. Sorry, should be able to minimize the Zoom window. Okay. Sorry for viewers who are watching, but this is kind of technology in action, I guess. So we might need to go. What happens? No, that's the wrong view. That's going to just show Mark. Okay, let me just see if I can cast. Otherwise, I'll have to read it out and that will be fine. Searching. Sorry, everyone. Let's see if we can get the position statement up rather than a photo of me, eh? How embarrassing. I'm just wondering why it's not showing. Position statement. Any idea, Brendan, how I get this to actually see the council agenda? Yeah, no, sorry. Oh, wait on. Let me just see if I can. Yeah, I might need to read it out to you. Sorry, there's not a lot of days around and could maybe support, but if he isn't, I might just need to read it out. Cool. Yeah, no, it's not. I think you found it. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so one because I don't have it in front. Come back. Is it moving? No, I'm going to have to read it out. Sorry. I'm not quite sure. It may do if you move it up. No. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to read it out. Sorry, people. It's not, the technology is not on our side today. Okay. So everything in the introduction, if you've got it in front of you, stays the same. Our position we support, that first lot of bullet points stay the same. Then into the we are concerned about, I've added how our assets will be valued, dash, we suggest this is undertaken by an independent valuer. Then I've added another one, water is critical to land productivity and our rural water schemes play a vital role. We suggest that rural water supplies be given a voice in the governance structure. This could be by way of a subcommittee and then representation on the RRG. Does that capture the connection with land and productivity and the governance side of things around that? No, but if there are 10,000 rural water schemes around the country, then it may be that in our entity, there's a subcommittee and 2 of those people have a voice on the main. So it may not be our water schemes, but it would be someone who understands the complexity and nature of rural water schemes and can represent them. That might be the best we can get, really.
That is assuming that districts, the rural districts, don't own schemes, whereas at this stage their stance is they belong to their individual.
Yes.
So that needs to be if you want to have them represented and you would like to think there's a diversity of skills on any experience on any governance entity. But I just squirm at the idea that we're going along with this.
I suppose the challenge with the Waipa scheme is from the same water source as the community, as opposed to an independent water source like all the other schemes are, which is the scheme which Councillor Johnson's talking about.
Yeah, I don't know how I only know the schemes that I've been involved in.
I think there's been enough clarity now that there is a change in direction there. So I suppose, on your point, whether we question whether that even needs to be in there, it's then implying that.
Yeah.
Not as an ownership thing.
So through you, Your Worship, could we say that is our position? Our position is that rural water schemes be excluded from the reforms.
If that is what they choose.
Is that what you're wanting here?
I haven't had clarity from all the water schemes to say that's the case. Certainly from Robin saying with Ōtorohanga that there is probably the case, but
Mark has received the rural water scheme feedback.
Mark.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. I think each scheme is different, but no one's. I think Waipa is definitely connected to the Ōtorohanga water treatment plant, and they completely understand that whichever position council takes, they will have to align with that. But their sort of keys to their support was having that ability to be at some form of decision-making table, which we've covered off today at length. I haven't had any real clear indications from the other schemes whether they would go alone or not. There's definitely talk of what that may look like, but I've had no indications either way. So, I mean, maybe that's a question that needs to be asked. So we've got some clarity around that going forward.
Thanks, Mark, through your worship. So could we then say that we would like rural water schemes to have an option of opting in or opting out themselves? Is that what we want? As their own governance entity, that they have an opportunity to weigh up all the pros and cons and make their decision. Is that, do you think that might be I don't know, Mark, any kind of commentary on that?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to give them that opportunity to put the cards on the table, and you know, I think rather than us trying to guess what that is, let's put it to them and ask them what their position would like to be with that option to be excluded or not.
Yes, absolutely. So we should, through you, personally, I think it's irrelevant who actually owns the rural water supply asset. I'm talking about giving those people a voice somewhere.
Yeah.
So whether it's owned by them or owned by us is immaterial to me. It's making sure that they get some representation at a level that can be heard. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yep. So through you wish I'd put both in. Yeah, this is cool. Yeah, what is it? Having your cake and eating it too. So we would like rural water schemes to have the option of opting in or opting out of the reforms and to make that decision themselves. Should the reforms proceed as they are, we suggest that rural water schemes be given a voice in the governance structure. This could be by way of a subcommittee and representation on the RRG. Then we're saying our preference is for them to be able to make that decision themselves. But if not, then we want them to at least have a voice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem here is we've got the two parts of the reforms. One of them is obviously the ensuring that the water quality is there, and the other is about the investment in infrastructure. Councillor Williams, you Antonio.
Okay, further down, I've added entities must give effect in an ongoing way to council's LTP AMPS and infrastructure strategy, i.e. beyond the first 3 years of the 2014 long-term plan. Is that what you were saying? Because it's not this long-term plan, it's the next long-term plan that we're worried about. So 2024 ongoing. Yep. Beyond it. Yep. So my next question is, we've had a couple of responses from iwi, some up to the iwi are concerned about, and I've put in brackets, see attachment for further comments. Do we want to attach the information as it's come in its entirety to this statement of position? Or do we want to just make sure that we've covered off the concerns that they've raised?
I think just make sure you cover off the concerns that are raised.
Okay, right. I might just need some time to have another look at that then. Or Mark, you might have to quickly bring up that the one from Mia at Maniapoto Māori Trust Board and just make sure that we've reflected. So then right down to the conclusion, and I've said we look forward to, number one, seeing our concerns and the concerns of our community reflected in the final direction of the reform package. This is a fundamental basis of democracy. 2, our questions in this, we look forward to our questions in this position statement being answered. Number 3, ongoing constructive dialogue with the government on a matter that is so important to our community. Okay, so that's our conclusion now around what we're looking forward to.
We're waiting for the wording of the email.
Well, yeah, you might need to give us a 10-minute time out just to make sure that we've got it all. Sorry.
leave it in its entirety.
Yeah.
Can you just attach that in your report so it's not interpreted or reworded and it's in the entirety
I
of
think
what
good
they
point.
said?
Thank you, councillor.
That would be, thank you, through you, Worship, that would be probably my suggestion, is it's kind of important that maybe, because I think when I read Barney and Mia's responses, I kind of checked as Mark and I put this together that it was, but we didn't put it in its entirety. So I just wonder whether we don't attach it, and I mean, we can check with them that they're happy with it to go with our statement of position.
Well, I think that would be the fact that they gave it to us for that purpose.
Can I see
Yeah.
just a quick email to make sure that
Yeah.
they're good with that?
Cool, can do that. Just send a message. Okay.
Cool. So with those amendments, we then go back to the original. Mark, shall I put it back to you?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I'll go back to the original recommendation. Sorry, it's further up. So the recommendation reads that receive the report by the acting group manager of engineering assets. Point 2 is adopts the position statement on the Three Waters reform as Ōtorohanga District Council's feedback on the impacts of the reform, and to authorise Council's Chief Executive to forward the position statement to the Minister of Local Government. That's the recommendation in front of you today. Is then probably no need to amend that, Tanya, on the
Through you, Worship, yes, there is. Sorry, I've got people watching us that are just giving me a bit of feedback to say that they can't necessarily tell who is speaking, and so could we say it's Tanya? And yeah, so that people know at home. Sorry, we do have people watching, which is really nice. So I'm just thinking that authorises Council's Chief Executive to forward the amended or the position statement as amended. Is that what you said, Mark?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking,
yep.
considering
To the
we've made
Minister of
some
Local
changes to,
Yep.
that we change it to amended position statement.
Yeah,
Correct.
and number 2 as well. Yeah, adopts the amended
Amended.
position statement or the position statement as amended.
Are all councillors happy with that position?
Also,
So move councillor Jeffries. I'll second that. All in favour? Aye. Awesome. Aye. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for the work that's gone into this. It's a huge document. Let's hope the government listens to us now.
Thank you, Worship. It was a team effort. I can't take all the credit. Thank you.
Cheers. Moving on to item 190, the Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan. I'll hand over to Ross. Welcome, Ross.
Yes, morning, Your Worship, councillors. I'll take, Your Worship, the report as read, but what I do want to do is perhaps highlight just a couple of key points for members' consideration. So I think the first of those is that the Town Concept Plan is really a blueprint for guiding the future development of Ōtorohanga. So in itself, it is not a statutory document, but it will link through to our statutory documents, and those are the long-term plan, the annual plan, and the district plan, or whatever future spatial plan may come out of the Resource Management Act reform. So I'm talking here about giving effect to the Town Concept Plan through those other statutory documents. Thinking about the process for developing the Town Concept Plan, that's going to allow for the identification and consideration of opportunities, issues, and challenges through a comprehensive engagement process with our community and stakeholders. So this is set out on page 10 and 11 of the agenda in the report.
So essentially the output, the plan itself, is a spatial representation of an action plan that will have short, medium and long-term phases to it. So I guess a way of thinking about this is that it's a reflection of what Ōtorohanga could look like by 2050 with an action plan behind it to help us get there. Thinking about the scope, some elements of the scope have been identified in the report on page 11, and most of these have come through the initial Ōtorohanga 2050 process and more recently the long-term plan process. I think it's fair to say, though, that other matters will come up through the process of developing the concept plan, so we shouldn't put any limits on what these might be, but just simply allow the process to deal with those. A draft or an outline project plan's been developed, and that's shown in Appendix 1 on page 15 of the agenda. So this signals that the bulk of the work will occur in the new year, potentially starting early in the new year, perhaps from early February, with a plan adoption by council scheduled prior to the October 2022 local elections. A successful process and plan output will be down to the roles played by various groups, with local leadership and effective project management support central to this. So again, in the report, there's a section on roles and responsibilities, and they're on page 12 and 13. Central to the delivery of the town concept plan will be the Ōtorohanga Community Board. The board's considered and endorsed the approach set out in the report at their recent meeting, and that's been reflected in this report for your consideration. Supporting and feeding into the process of developing the plan will be a community steering group. The terms of reference for this group are set out in Appendix 2 on pages 24 and 25. And finally, consultants will be critical to the delivery of the town concept plan. And we need to appoint those consultants early in the process. So that will be by way of a tender process, which will commence early next month, with the consultants in place by Christmas. Appendix 3, which is on page 26 of the agenda, sets out the scope of work for the consultants. I can report, Your Worship, that there's already been strong interest shown by a number of consultants in this work, so I'm confident we'll get a number of high caliber proposals. So I did give a heads up to a range of consultants earlier in the month. So that's a positive indicator of the level of interest that we're likely to see. So I don't, Your Worship, wish to add any further other than pointing out the recommendations that are in the report for Council's consideration.
Awesome, thank you, Ross. Hey, look, it was really exciting when you read through this report, the different stages, the opportunities that are there, and you answered that question of mine, which was what's the opportunity for getting high quality consultants working with us in the space. So it's certainly comforting to hear that there's those out there chomping at the bit to assist us in this process. Now, it's really exciting. I think when we see that to have those positions filled by the end of this year and things getting underway with a whole lot of the delivery sorted by elections next year is really promising as well. Councillor Ploss has a question, I believe.
Yes, or it is over 10 years since you've had disability support from do a review of Ōtorohanga. In that time, there has been a lot of changes of activity in the town and obstacles for people, especially whether it is, I don't know, I haven't seen any electric scooters in Ōtorohanga, but there are certainly a lot more people riding mobility, and so that causes lots of problems for people who have mobility issues. And I would really request that one of the first things you do, that you actually ask for that group to come back in and do a review. From my personal experience in this town is that there's not almost no seating, and I understand that at some stage seating was removed from the main street because shopkeepers didn't like people congregating there. If you have issue with mobility, you do need to sit down quite often, and also even in shops that they actually do have seating for people to be able to sit and wait for their turn. And the other thing is the parking, disability parking in this town is miserable, and it's not necessarily located in a suitable place. So I'm merely asking that that review happens by the appropriate people.
Your Worship, perhaps I can comment if I may.
Please, Ross.
So Councillor Kloss's comments, I think, are well covered within point 3 and 4 in terms of the scope of work that we'll be asking the consultants to undertake. So that's an appendix 3.
It's just not mentioned specifically.
I think this fact is covered in the scope of work, and now you've brought it to Ross's attention. I'm sure that message will be clearly conveyed.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, can I just congratulate Ross on a very comprehensive report? I think it's excellent, and I also want to compliment the Community Board for its support of this. It's quite an exciting project, and I think probably it's not just the Community Board that's looking forward to seeing those developments happen, I can assure you. I only had one quick question, and it was really just clarification in the table on the bottom of page 13 and 14, I think it was. The position of project manager, was it envisaged this be appointee be a staff member, or are you going to outsource that role?
Through Your Worship, Tanya, as the Chief Executive, has invited me to consider being the project manager for this work, and I'm happy to do that. It is, as you say, a very exciting project, and I'd really like the opportunity to continue to be part of it.
Excellent. I was hoping that you would say that, Ross.
Ditto.
Is there anything further, councillors? Look, just to reiterate what Councillor Jeffries said, look, a fine piece of work here, and it's really, as I said, exciting reading. I'm looking forward to the progression over the next little while. So we've got your recommendations in front of us. Ross, you don't mind if I read them out?
Go ahead, Your Worship.
Awesome. So the recommendations that the Ōtorohanga District Council receives this report: Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan, proposed scope, process, roles and responsibilities. Part 2 confirms the initial project plan for the development of the Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan as presented. Part 3 confirms the leadership role of the Ōtorohanga Community Board in the development of the draft Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan. 4 confirms the establishment in terms of reference for a community steering group to support the development of the Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan. 5 instructs the Ōtorohanga District Council Chief Executive to proceed with the Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan project in general accordance with this report and the initial project plan is presented. Part 6 confirms that the appointment of consultants to support the Ōtorohanga Town Concept Plan project be determined by the Chief Executive with support from a procurement panel comprising representation from the Ōtorohanga Community Board, elected council and council staff. I'd like to move that. Do I have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Christensen. All in favour? Carried. Again, thanks, Ross. Awesome. Looking forward to having you on board through this journey. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, councillors.
Right, moving on to item 191, Ōtorohanga District.
Hey,
Sorry.
Let's make a comment on.
Yeah, please.
Like, I didn't want to affect I think it's gone through and it's a great thing and all that.
My
I
apologies.
just want everyone to be, to think about it. And don't get locked in, that's an Ōtorohanga town concept. It's just for Ōtorohanga town, because this is for the whole district. Right, this really affects the whole district. We make this town vibrant. It is for all the community, from here to the sea, from and to this river.
Yeah, that's absolutely valid point, and I see it in terms of rural communities. We always look for the town centre of the district that we represent, and if you've got a town which is vibrant and exciting and is enticing, this is what this journey is about. So, totally support you. Moving on to item 191, Ōtorohanga District Occupancy Policy and Community Occupancy Guidelines. Trish, welcome.
Can I, through you, Your Worship, just before Trish starts, this is day 2 for Trish in her new role. So she commenced as manager property yesterday. So at the moment, we don't have a manager community and economic development, but Trish has obviously been working on this occupancy policy all along, because it kind of straddled both roles. But yeah, I just want to let council know that she's formally in the new role.
Awesome. Welcome back to where you started, Trish.
Thanks, everybody. All right, through you, Your Worship, I'd like to present today the draft Ōtorohanga District Occupancy Policy and the Ōtorohanga District Community Occupancy Guidelines. For way of a summary, I know we've workshopped this last week, but it's quite detailed. For way of a summary, I thought I'd read out the executive summary, actually. The draft Ōtorohanga District Occupancy Policy has been developed to set out the framework for decision-making regarding occupancy arrangements for all of council-owned property, including community groups occupying council property, classified community use. Provide direction to staff managing council occupancies and clarity to occupiers and potential occupiers of council property to ensure the service aligns with best practice, occurs in a consistent, efficient, effective manner, is transparent, fair and accountable, maximises economic return in commercial properties and maximises community benefit in community properties. The supporting guidelines have been developed in accordance with and to support the implementation of the policy. And this is to provide information to community groups wishing to have an occupancy agreement with council for council community property. It's also to provide guidance for property staff administering the council's community property portfolio, and to make community properties available for use by community groups by supporting the vital role of community groups and providing a rental subsidy for the occupancy of the community properties by community groups. So this policy and these guidelines don't apply to the management of council's older persons housing, just to be clear on that around occupancies. As you know, that's been covered under a separate policy. So aside from that summary, I'd like to take the report, the policy and the guidelines as read. I'm open for questions, obviously, or discussion around aspects of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Trish. Yeah, I'll open up to the floor. I think we covered it pretty well the other day in the workshop, but Councillor Jeffries is chomping at the bit.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I had a discussion with Trish about one or two aspects of this yesterday, and I appreciate Trish. I appreciate your feedback on those. I just wanted to make it clear that one of the questions I had was that the term of the lease agreements were for 5 years, and it didn't appear to me in the document that there was any right of renewal. But Trish is telling me now that what's going to happen there is that rather than have a right of renewal clause in leases going forward, that staff will actually be discussing with the occupants or the lessees prior to that 5-year period coming up, any new lease agreement that might be being proposed at that stage. And so you'll actually have one lease agreement finishing at the end of 5 years, and then a new one starting on day one of the next 5 years, assuming that it's going to continue. So I just wanted to make that point. The other question I had was around the revenue that the new policy would generate for the council. And Trish was saying to me that there are a number of council-owned properties at the moment that we do not get any income off at all, and that this policy will address that. and accepting that there are swings and roundabouts in terms of current leaseholders, what they pay. Some will pay more, some will pay less under this new policy. I just wanted to make sure that our revenue projections at least met our budget expectations for year one. And I think that exercise is still to be completed. If you'd want to, can you confirm that, Trish? Is that the case?
Yep, through you, your chair. So Councillor Jeffries and I had a conversation yesterday around sort of the over and unders of the current revenue and what the proposed revenue would be, just to make sure there's no big spikes either under or over in our budget that's forecasted through the long-term plan. So the quick analysis we did of those 10 sort of sample community leases looked like overall the bottom line was sort of going to smooth out. But what I said to Councillor Jeffries is, while we're out to public notification for feedback for that month, we're actually going to behind the scenes take a really close look at the known leases and the agreements across particularly the community leases, because that's where there'll be, you know, some changes, and look at what that financial modelling is going to be, so we can bring back with a final policy for adoption further information around the financial impacts, which I haven't gone into in the financial analysis of this report. The other thing Kit's touched on it is that we do have a lot of grazing happening out across the district. We own a substantial amount of land that's currently being grazed, good dairy, good effective grazing land that's been grazed for free. So we'd like to tidy up some of those so they're consistent with the grazing leases we do have in place. We're expecting an increase in revenue from a result of tidying those up and actually formalising agreements and rentals on those grazing leases. So that's your esplanade reserves, your old river reserves, quarry reserves, things like that. There's a lot around the district that we're not charging for. So yeah, that was the increase we're expecting, but we're hoping across the community portfolio that it probably will balance out, but we'll bring that information back to you in a month.
Just one further quick one. The percentage of the grants coming back from the community grants account back into the lease revenues is currently suggested at 98%, but I gather that's just a factor that can be manipulated depending on the level of revenue that we require. I just want to make this point that this isn't a revenue gathering exercise. This is trying to put everyone on a fair and equitable basis across all of the council-owned properties. So we do have the possibility that if the 98% that's referred to there is going to generate more revenue than what the budget requires, we do have the ability to reduce that percentage. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, your chair. That is correct. So we've only proposed a 98% subsidy rate. What Councillor Jeffries and I spoke about yesterday is that subsidy rate can be set by the elected members at whatever value they want to, as long as it's fair and transparent, obviously. So through the financial modelling we're going to do over the next month, if suddenly we see a real dip in the budgets or a real spike in the budgets because of the 98% subsidy being applied, then there might be a suggestion or a recommendation from staff in that final report to look at the percentage rate to sit with where the overall income is going to sit. Does that make sense?
I think probably the main things here, Trish, is to have some sound methodology around the delivery of the leases, so we've got a clear understanding of how it's how they're given out, and the other part of it is that we're addressing the inequities that are currently in place that we've seen. So it's just getting all those systems in place which we haven't had there before. It just makes it a lot easier for elected members knowing full well that there is a basis behind the giving of the leases. So thank you. Anything further, councillors? Trish, another wonderful report. Thank you for the absolute time and effort that's gone into this. Pretty huge, but hey, it is part of your job now, so thank you.
Thank you.
It's nice that you can actually just focus on this as well.
Absolutely.
So we have the recommendation that the draft Ōtorohanga District Occupancy Policy along with the draft Ōtorohanga District Community Occupancy Guidelines as attached to this report is adopted by Council, subject to A, undergoing a public notification period of 1 month, inviting feedback on the draft policy and draft guidelines. B, any known affected parties, including current occupiers of council property, being informed of the draft policy and draft guidelines being open for feedback. And C, staff reporting back to council post the notification period closing with a summary of any feedback received along with any suggested amendments to the draft policy or draft guidelines as a result of the feedback process. Everyone happy with that? Cool. Do I have a mover? Move Councillor Christensen, second Councillor Ferguson. All in favour? Aye. Awesome. Thanks, guys. And thanks again, Trish.
Thank you.
Right, moving on to, I presume Brendan's still there, or Bunny? Graham, sorry. Financial report for the month ending 31st of August 2021. Graham and Brendan.
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Just because I've got two computers here, so I got to make sure I'm not creating feedback with the stream. Okay, so the financial report to the end of August. So I'll take it as read. It's basically the same as last month, just with updated figures, obviously. We're still in the process of getting the annual report completed at this point. So I'll just change that. So the final figures for last year haven't been done. So some of the stuff that relies on that, such as interest calculations and all that sort of stuff for this year, hasn't been done yet. We're hoping at this point that we should still finish that within the time frame that we've said, which I think was the risk and assurance meetings on the 11th of October, and we're aiming for that at the moment. I guess just to go through in terms of the revenue and expenses. So we've got a net surplus to the end of August of 4.7 million, which is slightly up on our budgeted of 4.3. So obviously the first 6 months worth of rates has been invoiced now, and a large portion of those are paid. We did, with the end of August being the deadline for payment before penalties went on, and with the fact that we were in lockdown at that point and a lot of people still pay their rates by cash, and they couldn't come into the office to pay that, we did actually extend that deadline. So we can, while we have to set those deadlines as part of our long-term plan and the rates resolution, we don't actually have to apply them on those dates if we don't. So it was decided to give people a grace period until they could come in and pay their rates by cash, if that's how, or EFTPOS, if that's how they wanted to pay them. And subsidies and grants is still down on budget. Again, we're still waiting on NZTA, so they wanted us not to do any claiming from them until the end of September because of some updates they were doing to their program that they use for doing their claiming. So we haven't done any claiming there. The bulk of that subsidy that's in there, the 264,000, is the 250,000 from Mayor's Task Force for Job for the second tranche, or second year's worth, first tranche of the second year of the employment subsidy that we're getting through them. Statement of financial position on the next page. So yeah, we're in a healthy position there. We've still got a lot of money in the bank. We've still got no debt at this point, which is good. Okay. So yeah, as you can see, total current assets are 7.5, liabilities are 1.3, giving us a working capital of 6.2. And then our cost of service statement is just the breakdown into the individual groups of activities. So again, expenditures down there, part of that obviously due to the lockdown, some of the work that might have been done towards the end of August wasn't done and therefore hasn't been invoiced. I would expect for that essential stuff that'll start to pick up again in September when we moved into level 3 and down into level 2. So I guess that's it. Are there any questions coming from that?
Thank you, Brendan. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Worship. Just one point of clarification, please, Brendan. The property, plant, and equipment figure and the revaluation reserve, they both reflect the revaluations done at 30th of June? Yes, that's correct. They do include that. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
thank you for another monthly report and accepting that there's quite a few gaps in it. Much better that we see it and maintain the process and get caught up when we can. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention my perennial green light caution, that green does not always mean good. It just means we haven't done something in some cases.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Now, good, I'm just again reiterating what Councillor Williams said. It's great to get these monthly reports, even to highlight where there's been movement or lack of movement as a consequence, and certainly at this time because of COVID, or just where we are in terms of the time of year. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have staff recommendation that the financial report for the month ending 31 August 2021 be received. Move Councillor Jeffries, second Councillor Williams. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to Landon Buildings valuation. Same team.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sound. So how this is, sorry, multiple things going on at once. This is the results of the land and buildings valuation that we got QV to do to the end of June this year, or 2021, yep. I'll take the report mostly as read. This has already been to the Risk and Assurance Committee for review. They went through it in quite some detail, going through particularly the chairperson went through in quite some detail. Since that meeting, as I pointed out, Deloitte started their work and they found an issue with some of the workings that QV provided, which QV had not actually found themselves. They have their own process to find these sort of things, and for some reason it didn't pick it up. So we've resolved that issue. So there was the 6 properties. These are all properties that were valued using the fair market value basis, which is basically it takes the rental and a market capitalization figure, works out a value from that, and then takes the land off to get to the value of the buildings. So these are mostly residential and commercial properties. So the 6 properties are actually impacted with the 3 pensioner housing properties, being the 2 in Ōtorohanga and the 1 in Kawhia. It was the council building that you're all sitting in at the moment. It was 120 Maniapoto Street, which is where the sport house is, and it was the depot on Progress Drive. So the impact to all of those has been that, so the impact to the valuation that was originally looked at by the Risk and Assurance was about a $2 million decrease on what was originally provided because of the land values for those 6 properties. Since this issue was identified, Deloitte has come back to us and said they have looked at those properties and they're happy that the calculations are now right, but they're now raising some queries about what's happened because of these changes in these figures. The values of the buildings in most of these cases, with the exception of the council building, have actually decreased. So for the 3 pensioner housing units, they have not decreased that much. It's only about 2 to 4%. So that's reasonable given the age of them. We didn't spend much in the way of capex in the last year. The 2 big ones that have had a big decrease is the depot and Maniapoto Street, which have both gone down. One's about 26%, one's a 37% decrease. So the reason why this decrease has happened is due to that methodology of how they're valued. So because in the last 12 months, market rentals have not increased substantially, and I guess that's partly due to COVID and everyone not wanting to put rentals up on people that are struggling because of that. And the capitalisation rates haven't changed. So the fair values of both those properties have not actually changed from the valuation we had done at the end of 30 June 2020. But what that means is because of the methodology, you take the land off, and because the land has increased substantially, if your fair value doesn't change, the actual value of the buildings comes down. So it's a quirk of that type of methodology for valuing the properties. I think from our point of view, from a finance point of view, while it seems weird, it's reasonable because that is the methodology that QV picked to use and they are the experts, so we rely on them. But I guess it was just to highlight to you that this was a quirk that did come out of this valuation, so that council was aware of it. And
So,
I guess,
Brendan, who's
yeah.
who's right or wrong then? You say QV are the experts, but then Deloitte's are saying the methodology is wrong. I find it tough. So one's the expert and one's not. But you just said QV is, but Deloitte's are questioning it.
Deloitte's not saying the methodology is wrong. I guess they're saying that the result is weird, or they wouldn't. It's not what they'd expect, but that's a result of the methodology. So there's nothing we can actually do. If that's the methodology that's used to calculate it, it is just the result that comes out.
Okay, thank you. Right, as Brendan said, we've taken this out. It's Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just a question, Brendan, can you just explain the difference between the operational land and buildings and restricted land and buildings?
Yep. So sorry. So restricted land and buildings is, particularly in land, it's reserve land. It's land where there's some other restriction that would prevent it from being easily sold on the open market. So if it's sort of land under the Reserves Act or cemeteries, for example, restricted land, because you can't easily sell those off for obvious reasons. Whereas operational buildings and operational land are basically freehold. There's no restrictions over it. We can easily sell it all off tomorrow if we wanted, sort of thing.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, Brendan, thank you very much. We have the recommendation that council adopts evaluation of the lands and buildings. We have a mover and a seconder for those, please. First, Councillor Dowell, second, Councillor Jeffries, all in favour? Carried, thank you. Thanks, guys. Yeah, thank you. I'm surprised I hadn't moved more actually when we looked at those valuations, but that's fine. Moving on to item 194, planning report for April to June 2021. If Andrew is with us.
He should be.
Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning. I thought I wasn't on till after lunch. Yeah, it's a pretty brief report. It's just the statistics for the last quarter of the financial year. Probably the, sorry, I'll just open the document. Noticeable is the large number of subdivisions. The rural property market is very strong at the moment, particularly for lifestyle blocks, and that's reflected in the number of people taking advantage and subdividing, actioning their subdivision rights and taking lots off their farms. Happy to take any questions on those planning stats.
Andrew, in discussions I've had with you over the last couple of years, you talked about there's a lot of land out there in the rural community that had already been subdivided, but had never been enacted in terms of actively for sale. Has that changed quite a bit as well?
I suppose the number of houses that we're seeing is indicating that those people are taking up, taking the opportunity now to low interest rates, borrowing to build on those vacant sections, but there is still a large number of vacant sections out there. I wouldn't be able to quantify it, but I know when I drive around that there are people are still holding them. I think possibly some people invest to release the capital and sell, and others just take the titles and bank them. They land bank them, and you own it without debt. I suppose the holding costs aren't high, and they're able to take advantage of the movement in the market, which has been marked, as everyone knows, over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, thank you. And this report goes to the end of June. Since June, there's been quite a bit of activity as well.
It has continued unabated, that's correct.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ploss.
Yes, I'm delighted that something that I predicted some years ago and had potential was the further development in the village of Ōtorohanga, and the because I think in the recent time there's been a couple of new lots, and so that means there's actually small, very small developments in that area, and so we're actually getting quite a community there.
It's wonderful to hear.
I think it is.
Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of clarification, more than anything, Andrew, when did development contributions kick in terms of, like, you know, you've got a number of land use consents issued there, subdivisions and so on. I'm just curious as to at what stage do we actually impose, if you like, development contributions?
So there's two parts to my answer. The firstly is the development contributions only apply where we have identified an area of benefit. So in the rural community, we only have one area of benefit, which is the 3 roads up the slopes of Mount Pirongia. So when someone applies for a subdivision on one of those roads, for every lot created, at the time that we sign off the Section 224 certificate, which is when they've completed all the conditions on their consent and paid all their consent fees, we invoice them. At that time, we invoice them for the development contribution, and that has to be paid before we release the certificate. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does in part. If there is a subdivision of some sort and a building or a house or whatever is not built on it, does that still attract a development contribution, or is the development contribution only considered at the time that a building is put on the property?
No, it is the other stages. If there's an existing block there, sorry, so again, 2 parts. So for a new subdivision, every new lot that's created is assessed as having to have a suitable building platform on it. So on large sites, those platforms or that building area may not be identified because it's obvious when you've got 50 acres or 50 hectares, you're going to have a building site there somewhere. So that's left at the discretion of the owner or the future owner to decide where they'll put that site. If there is a vacant property and someone wishes to place a dwelling on there, that development contribution would be levied at the time they apply for the code compliance certificate when the dwelling is completed.
That answers it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for answering those, Andrew. Any further questions? If not, we have the staff recommendation that the planning report for April to June 2021 be received. Move Councillor Kloss, second Councillor Williams, all in favour. Thank you. While you're still there, Andrew, moving on to item 195, Animal Control Officer's report from April through June 2021.
Thank you, Worship. So this report's even more brief. Had to pull it together without much of an opportunity to consult anyone. It's the end of the last financial year. Our dog numbers, tags issued, reached about 2,400. I didn't have that detail available at the time I wrote my report, but yeah, I was quite pleased that our registration tally reached that high, actually, which I think was a slight increase on the previous year. I'll have more detail at the next council meeting on those final figures for the last financial year.
Awesome, thanks, Andrew. Any questions concerning the Animal Control Officer's report, councillors? If not, we have the recommendation that the report on dog and animal control activities for the second quarter of 2021 be received. Do I have a mover and a second for that, please? Councillor Jeffries, Councillor Ferguson, all in favour? Carried. Thank you, Andrew. You can go and have some early lunch.
I know, I can't leave the enthralling show.
Okay, moving on to councillor update. Councillor Johnson.
Not much to report. I guess bulk of the communication I've been having is with the Water Scheme Committee regarding the 3 waters. I'm not going to do that again, so we've done that. But just an update on BT Home 2. There's about a week ago we had 10 residents in the new dementia unit, and it's sort of got a bit held up with lockdown, but it's filling up fast. We used to have 40 staff. We're up to 52, and we need another 8 to. So we sort of have to get the residents and the staff matched up as it gets going. We had we've about half consumed our budget for that. The costs from before all the income comes in from being fully staffed, so it's all on track. And it'll be full, probably within a month, I would think. But it's all going well. There's still little bits of teething jobs with any new build just to finish off. To give Stuart Gower and Trevor Walters, they've been huge champions of project management and getting that building up and running right up to its last little bit. So, but otherwise it's all on track. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Christensen.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Councillor Dow.
I haven't got much to report on this month. I've been in a little bubble just trying to test all our drivers and that, so they can go through Auckland and travel around. So COVID's put a bit of a damper on things. At least we're still moving. So test.
Thank you. Councillor Klaas.
First of all, the boil water restrictions moved on, will be moved from Ōtorohanga School. That is a huge plus because it was such a hassle for the principal of the school trying to, they don't have a large number of students. That means that a lot of it is dependent on the principal. And I'd like to thank the stance of the council talking to supply the school with water each day to make it easier for them to do this. So thank you to that for that proactive action. The other thing is related to the COVID vaccinations. The Marae Ruhi through Katerina Hodge have initiated some places for vaccinations to be held and available in part of our area, and I'm not sure how far it spread. It started, people doing the vaccination was DHB, it was at Karakanui Hall on Monday, it's at Punui River Care today, it's at Takara Crossroads on Wednesday, and on Thursday it's at Parongia Hall, and on Friday it's the QQ United Sports, and anyone can go to that. It's between 10 and 3 o'clock. I emailed a significant number of the people who live in the greater Ōtorohanga area. I took advantage of the texting tree that the people who are watching the area, so I tagged it on those, and and got out emails to a significant number of people who, because I'm worried that workers are not getting support to actually get their vaccinations, and that's actually proved. There's some instances, even if I'm honest, that people know their workers weren't getting the vaccination. So I'm know there's been conversation about whether some of the local halls could be used to actually contract for people to get vaccinations. I don't know how big that issue is. Farmers contacted and saying, oh, yes, no, we've had ours. Some of the continent people. Do we know how well the area across the Ōtorohanga area and even some of your own rural areas are actually, is that a problem?
I think it's just going to be ongoing, isn't it? And hopefully the farm owners do give their farm workers the opportunity to make an informed decision as to whether they get vaccinated or not.
Through you, Worship, we're really struggling to hear people. Can you move your mics kind of as close as you can? Because our staff who are sort of taking minutes and even the recording, we're going to find it difficult to hear some of this.
Thank you.
All I'll say about that is I think that council is probably one of the few entities that can actually assist in that area. And do we know whether there's any gaps in vaccination coverage?
I'll talk to Rachel after this meeting and she'll be able to inform me. I know there's more vaccination centres being put up around the place as we speak.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
I am double vaxxed. Nothing else to report.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, 27th of August was the community board meeting at Kāwhia. We had your Zoom meeting.
Just bring your mic a bit closer to yourself, too, Councillor Jeffries.
Yep, that better?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll start again then. 27th of August, Kāwhia Community Board. 30th of August, we had your mayoral catch-up by Zoom. And we also had our risk and assurance meeting by Zoom on the 1st of September. And then last week we had 3 council workshops on the 20th, 21st and 23rd. I also attended the Kai Festival Committee meeting. And if you haven't already read, the committee has resolved that the Kai Festival for 2022 will be postponed. They have concerns about the uncertainties around this COVID Delta strain and people coming into the town. So they've decided to flag it, which is regrettable but understandable, I guess. I'd like to, at this stage, I sent an email out to everyone this morning. You may not have had a chance to read that yet, but we had an incident at Kāwhia on the weekend, which is causing some real concern. And I just wanted to talk to you very briefly about that. I'll just bring this thing up if you don't mind. I'm getting a few emails, which I guess everyone else is getting too, about our discussion this morning on the Three Waters. On Saturday night out at Kāwhia, we had a situation that developed, which that I've had a number of people talk to me about and raise their concerns about. And it's about a group that came out to Kāwhia. Most of them, in fact, the majority of them were out of towners. And they went down to Tom French Grove and they had what I'd call a burn up down there. And they've done a bit of damage down there. There are skid marks along pretty much the full length of Te Puia Road going into Tom French Grove. And when Jono, the local constable, arrived on the scene, he was threatened and abused including by members of the family whose son was having a birthday that day, which was unfortunate. When it became obvious he would be unable to control that situation on his own, he called for support, but he was advised that there were no reinforcements available, and he had no option but to back off as he was justifiably concerned for his own safety. His TNNR assessment, and I've given you a definition of that in the email, would not allow him to proceed or intervene on this alone. So he effectively left the mob to do pretty much what they wanted to out there, and yeah, they've made a bit of a mess. The really concerning thing is that I was talking with his wife last night, and she advised that this is not the first occasion that Jono has been threatened, and that the family itself has previously received death threats, including threats of people throwing Molotov cocktails through their windows, and their son has also been subjected to bullying. She has since come into possession of a video of the events at Tom French Grove, but I wasn't able to send those through with you because I'm technically incompetent and I wasn't able to attach that, but I do have it on my cell phone if you want to have a look at that. She also understood that a visiting couple who'd been at Ocean Beach were fearful of the situation, and being separated from their own vehicle had to wait until things had died down before exiting the scene. This is appalling publicity for our town and even for the district. And these sorts of things are going on with the attitude of some people towards our police. You may recall a few years back when Constable Griffin was assaulted, and he was very fortunate not to have received more injuries than those that he suffered. As a community and council, we cannot allow this behaviour and attitude to our police to continue. Enough is enough. Jono has managed to obtain details of some number plates with the use of cameras in town. He's working to have those vehicles impounded, but that requires a judge to issue court proceedings tomorrow at the earliest. So perhaps this latest incident supports previous requests from the community board out there to have a CCTV camera installed at Tom French Grove. So I'm really asking council for your support of Constable Mayato and lobbying his superiors to take every action available to them to not just apprehend those responsible, but to provide greater coverage in Kawhia, particularly with summer on its way. I understand that a similar burnout event has already been suggested in the future, and that Kawhia is seen as a soft target. So pretty much I'm just asking if we were prepared to discuss that and as a council take some action on it. Yeah, I think it's extremely disappointing, Your Worship, that there are people out there that don't appear to have any respect at all for police, and I really do feel sorry for our constable out there. He's one man that covers a huge district out there, and I don't blame the man from walking away from that event on Saturday night. If he tried to intervene, he probably would have ended up in hospital or worse. And I guess the side of that is that the family itself seems to be now the target of a number of threats as well. It's just not good enough. And I think the police need to address this.
We'll probably discuss this outside of a council meeting. But in terms of what I'll do, I'll certainly follow up with the area commander to see what's happening there. I think the police do take the issues in Kawhia very seriously compared to other small coastal communities around New Zealand. The fact that a small coastal community, a population of 300 has got a permanent police officer, for one, is quite unusual around New Zealand, and that they do throw an extra 2 or 3 resources out there over the summer to ensure that it's looked after. But what you've said is absolutely abhorrent. I totally agree. And the police officer had no option but to back away because, as you said, within his guidelines, he can't go in there and try and do anything by himself. He needs to back up. The fact that backup wasn't available from surrounding areas, I'll ask the question why. There could have been something more pressing going on somewhere else. So it'd be wrong of me to assume that the police were being are responsible in their activities until I know what they're doing outside of town. But yeah, it's unacceptable, and I'm a bit uncertain as to why some residents in Kāwhia believe that this is okay in their own community.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate your support on that. Yes, we have in the past had some difficulty attracting a policeman to Kāwhia, and these sorts of situations certainly don't help in that respect.
Yeah, I'll follow up with your commanders. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Here I was thinking that it had been quite quiet since our last meeting, but actually there's a few pages here, and most of it was daily contacts and updates with the NEMA, or the civil defence, just in mostly informational, just keeping the district, like the different councils, up to date with what was happening as far as welfare and support went, along with the quite a few meetings that were available to get more information about the water, and the risk and assurance meeting and various other catch-ups. Good to see that vaccinations are going to continue on a regular basis in Ōtorohanga till November. And while not on circumstances were not very good, it was really nice that when Ōtorohanga did come into the media, that it was well pronounced. It was very nice to hear.
Awesome. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Nothing further, so I'd imagine at this stage, anything further from you, Tony?
No, nothing from me, Your Worship. We've got a few workshops and briefings for you.
Awesome. Thank you. So on that note, I'd like to declare this council meeting closed, and we'll get together after a brief interlude for workshops.
Yep. Let me say through Your Worship, we'll just wait till Brendan has given us the okay that we've stopped streaming.